the scriptures acknowledge that we can expect that there will be struggles and there will be conflict, but the Bible gives us clarity on how to deal with that conflict. And one of the areas that I think raises a lot of conflict in relationships, work relationships, family relationships, marital relationships, spouse, children and their parents' relationship, is the idea of expectations. And so I've called tonight, study expectations, the unseen threat. It's this idea of these expectations being an unseen threat are going to show up in the marital relationships of the two sons, that is Esau and Jacob, in their interaction with Isaac and Rebekah. So if you have a Bible, I want to draw your attention to Genesis chapter 26, verses 34 and 35, and it's almost like this little parenthetical thought, but I think it's worth looking at because the subject matter shows up a couple of times in these chapters, and it's worth us really thinking about. The writer, Moses, has given us this little tidbit of information, and I think it's worth us looking at and not skimming past it, which is really easy to do because as chapter 26 comes to an end, it's really great to just jump to 27 because that's an amazing story. But stuck between is this account of Esau. Verse 34, Esau was 40 years old. He took Judith, the daughter of Beri, the Hittite, to be his wife, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon, the Hittite, and they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. So we have this boy, he's 40 years of age, he's gonna get married. There's no comment in here of any involvement with mom and dad in this. Seems to be no planning. There seems to be no conversation about it. There's no expectations that are given. He simply does it, and immediately it's clear he didn't live up to their expectations because they're not happy about this. Well, that's not the end of the story. Look at chapter 27, starting with verse 46. 27, 46. So and we will get to the middle, which is this fiasco between Isaac and Jacob and Esau and mom all together in this horrible deceit that's gone on. But at the end of all of that, Rebekah has learned that Esau is going to kill Jacob. And so she goes to Isaac and she's going to convince him to send Jacob away, not because he's going to be beheaded by his brother, but because she feels so bad she wants to save her beloved son from having to marry another Hittite woman who she loathes. So Rebekah says to Isaac, I loathe my life. You know, I mean, talk about dramatic. Because of these Hittite women, she's surrounded by two girls who happen to marry her son, who she doesn't like. And now she really doesn't like these two girls. And if Jacob marries one of these Hittite women like these two, one of these women of the land, what good will my life be to me? I would rather die than have a daughter-in-law like one of these two girls. So that's in the mix here. So you got the marriage of one boy. No expectations are given to him. No clarity is given. But whatever he has done has not lined up with their expectations. Now mom is bitter about it. She is extremely upset about it and wants to send Jacob to be married to a family member. If you remember the story, go back to my kinsfolk, because there you'll find a good girl, right? He doesn't want him to marry one of those Hittite, you know how those Hittite girls are. Their skirts are probably an inch too high. They probably do things they shouldn't. They listen to music. We do not want them marrying a Hittite. Send him to you know what happens there. We'll talk a little bit about what actually happens when he gets to Laban's house. But also notice this. What? Now Esau is watching all this in verse 6 of chapter 28. Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to Padan Aram to take a wife from there, and that he blessed him. He directed him. As he blessed him, he directed him. Here's the direction. Finally, we've got a little bit of expectation. You must not take a wife of the Canaanite women. There's my expectation of you. I don't care what she looks like. I don't care what her parents are like. I don't care what her education is. I don't know if she loves God. That doesn't matter. She just can't be Canaanite. That we have to eliminate. No Canaanite women in our family. That's the expectation. So Esau sees that Jacob had obeyed his father, verse 7, and his mother, and followed through with the expectation. Go to Panorama. So what does he do? He saw that the Canaanite women did not please Isaac, his father. It's like the light finally dawns on him. Mom and Dad don't like my girls. These women, my women. You know, and I think the light finally dawns. Like, oh, they don't like her. I want to meet their expectation. My brother has pleased them by leaving home and going and getting a wife. What am I going to do? I want to please Mom and Dad too. So Esau went to Ishmael and took as his wife, besides the wives he had, Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebaroth. So now we have this expectations that are creating these interesting dynamics, and I would like to present to you the idea that expectations can be an unseen threat to good relationships. Here's how, starting with your outline, verse 26, 34, and 35. At the age of 40, Esau does what all men did, take a wife. There does not seem to be any conversation about it, no arrangements made, no planning, no preparation as to who do you marry, when do you marry, how do we want this to go, how many women is appropriate. There doesn't seem to be any of that. He just goes, he takes 2 Hittite women, and Mom and Dad are not happy about it. He has not lived up to their expectations in this area. Yet, without any prior discussion of the matter, Mom and Dad are bitter about the situation. In verse 35, when it said made life bitter, it was probably a better translation of the Hebrew. They became bitter in spirit. The word life meaning their spiritual life, their hearts. Their hearts are bitter. Their spirit is bitter because of this, about what had happened. But my question is why? What's the problem here? What's the problem taking these Hittite women? Abraham had good relationships with Hittites, just in Isaac's lifetime. He had purchased land from the Hittites to bury Sarah. Both Abraham and Isaac made peace agreements in a formal official covenant with Philistines living in the area. That's part of the Canaanite community. The Philistines, the Hittites, that's part of this Canaanite. They're having relationships with these people. What's the problem, him going and taking a Hittite woman? There's no expectations. There are expectations that are unmet that create bitterness between Mom, Dad, and Esau. What's the problem? The struggle, page 13, the struggle of expectations is that they are often unknown. And I think Esau does not know his parents' expectations. They're unknown. I think men, I'm speaking for men because I don't know women's relationship with mom, but I have spent a lot of time with men. From grade school age kids running a Bible camp for 10 years, coaching for 20 years, all male sport through high school age kids, working with college students, working with men in church settings. Men, as they're growing up, know their dad has expectations, but many of them really don't know what they are. So expectations, often they're unknown. Sometimes they're unrealistic. We'll talk about that. And sometimes they're just not communicated clearly. Let's talk about the first one, which is unknown. I think that's what's going on with Esau in chapter 26. The expectations are unknown to Esau and uncommunicated by Rebekah and Isaac to him. The result of the unfulfilled expectations is bitterness of spirit. They believe like he should just know. I don't know how many wives I've had in my I don't have many wives. I don't know how many ladies who are wives of other men I've counseled with who have at some point in the conversation said he should just know. I'm sorry. What is happening in her heart? There's bitterness in her heart. He should just know. And the reason he doesn't do it, because he should know, he doesn't love me as much as he said he does. He should just, because if he did, he'd just know and he'd do it. No, he didn't. So there's a bitterness that comes into that. That's what's happening with mom and dad, because there's this unknown expectation that he cannot meet because he does not know what it is, and yet they have this idea that he should have some idea in this area, and it's creating a bitterness in their life, let alone these girls have different customs, different ways of doing things, and that's rubbing her wrong. I'm sure that's not pleasant for her. She would rather have somebody who is like their family, and that's why I think they send Jacob off that direction. Verse 46 on page 13, unfulfilled expectations unaddressed, because we're going to always not fulfill everyone's expectations. That happens. But unaddressed makes everyone miserable. Esau is miserable because he knows he hasn't lived up to the expectations. He just doesn't know what they are. I'm sure the daughter-in-laws are miserable having to live with this woman who hates them. Jacob is miserable, and Rebekah is miserable, who would apparently rather die than have this same thing happen to her beloved Jacob. And so though they probably try, people can't read your mind. And really you don't want them to, unless you think they should just know. And that's a problem. People may not just know, and it's okay to fill them in, to give them some understanding of what you were hoping and what you were expecting and what's reasonable and how you could work together to fulfill what you reasonably think they should be doing and you should be doing and working together. So there's this unknown factor that creeps in and causes relationship issues. There are unrealistic expectations. Sometimes there are expectations that are unrealistic, impractical, and in some cases impossible. Why such expectations on Rebekah's part? I mean, she has this expectation that Jacob is going to go find Mrs. Wright back home, and so she has this expectation that somehow it's going to be different, and I'm wondering why. At this point, as far as I could tell, at this point in the Old Testament, there is no command by God given concerning intermarriage with the Canaanite people. There will be, but not yet. So she can't go, well, God said, you can't go with those Hittite girls. The Lord said we can't. There's no mandate there yet. And what's interesting is they're going to send Jacob to their relatives to get a good girl, who is not a monotheist. She's from a family wrapped up in idol worship. They have family gods at home. She's not a monotheist. She doesn't worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in that family. But they're going to send her there because they'll find a good girl because she's kin. Well, what ends up happening? Well, the good girl, as we're going to see in later chapters, ends up being two good girls, and each of them give Jacob a servant, so when he actually does get home, he's got 4 wives. Which was better? 2 Hittites or 4 polytheists? But there's an unrealistic expectation. I think the expectation is we just send him to the right house, to the right school. We don't really need to tell him how he needs to live. We just make sure he's hanging out with the right people, going to the right school, and everything will be fine. Rather than actually explaining, this is what you need to be looking for in a wife. This is what we are expecting for you to consider as you're thinking about the choices you're making in life. There's just this expectation. We put him in the right place, around the right people, and everything's going to be fine. I see a lot of parents like, if we just get our kids in a Christian school, they're going to be fine. Well, they get in as much trouble in a Christian school as they do anywhere else. It's whether or not you instilled in your kids your expectations for how they make decisions, what friends they choose, what kind of decisions they make when they're stuck between peer pressure and doing the right thing. That's what really needed to be talked about. So the top of your page 14, the expectation is that if Jacob was just in the right place with the right people, he'll be good, he'll be fine. Well, maybe there's more to making good choices than just sticking people in the right places with the right people. Maybe you have to express and communicate those expectations. Sometimes we don't think about the nature of the expectations we have, and even if they are communicated, we need to make sure that they're realistic, they're practical, not something that's impossible for someone to do. Unrealistic expectations are most silent threat to unity and harmony in relationships. And what I found, and I counsel with a lot of young men who have fathers who have unrealistic and most of the time vaguely communicated expectations, and they just feel like they need to give up because the bar is impossibly high and it keeps getting moved and they can't really figure what it is. And so it's like, okay, I'm never going to please him, so why try? Thirdly, many expectations are not communicated clearly. In chapter 28, verses 6 through 9, and at the bottom of page 14, Esau is observing the situation. He's watching this interaction between his parents and his younger brother. Still, nothing is clearly communicated to him about his decisions. He wants to please his father, but he's not sure exactly what that will entail. I've spent many hours with men of all ages who still can't figure out how to please their fathers. They know they have had, their fathers had or have expectations. They're just not clear on what they are. So they spend years, some even after their father's death, trying to figure out if they please their father or not. This is a common issue on the heart of men that I've spoken with, especially in their middle-aged years, if their dads are still alive or recently passed. Like, did I ever please my dad? And they don't know. Because really, I think there's something in our hearts as men, but I think in all of us, not just men, but I've tried to use examples of men, women. I think in all of us, we want to hear, well done. We just don't want it, we just don't know what it will take to hear it. Here's the good news. Page 15. God our Father has made known his expectations. God our Father has made his expectations clear, and he's made his expectations of us obtainable. Jesus tells us that he's come down from heaven, not to do his own will, but to the will of him who sent him. So Jesus understood the expectations that the Father had in his life. And now he tells us that this is the expectation, this is the will of him who sent me, that I would lose nothing, and that all that he has given me, but raise it up at the last day. So that's the expectations of the Father, that Jesus would come and fulfill this mission of gathering together those who would put their faith and trust in his work on the cross and bring them into everlasting life. That was the expectation. And then he goes on and he says, and for this is the will of the Father, that everyone who looks on the Son and believes in him should have eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. So God has made his expectations clear. His expectation that his Son would come and give his life for us, and his expectation is that everyone who would look upon him and believe would enjoy this opportunity to have a relationship with him in eternal life. Jesus in Matthew 17:5 was speaking to them, and he said, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and the voice from the cloud said, this is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to you. Have this idea. These are God's expectations for us. These are achievable expectations, and we long to hear what Jesus says in Matthew 25:21 when he talks about the stewards, the servants who pleased their master. The master brought them before him and said, well done, good and faithful servants. You have been faithful over a little, I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. I think there's a longing on our part to satisfy each other's expectations and to hear that when we do, that they're thankful and grateful for what we've done for them. There is nothing wrong with expectations. We all have them. They must be spoken, they must be made clear, and they must be realistic. And I think that's at the heart of what is going on in this little few verses that are kind of lumped together in the marriages of these two sons set in the midst of this grand story of Jacob and Esau.